All right, welcome. We're ready to get started. I want to thank you guys for joining us tonight. My name is Katie Jones. I am the Chief Program Officer of Organizational Employment and Advocacy for BCI. We're glad that you can join us for the speaker series. We want to provide resources to our community and a little bit of housekeeping to get started with. Everybody on this is muted. So if you do have any questions, if you can please enter those into the chat, and then we will field those at the end of the presentation. This presentation is being recorded, so anybody who registered and was not able to attend, we can send out that recording to those in a couple days.
And quick, Katie, questions are going to go in the Q&A, not the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. Questions will go in the Q&A, not the chat, but we do have somebody fielding that. So this presentation is on guardianship and public benefits. However, when we lined up our presenters, we have decided to solely designate guardianship to its own presentation. There's so much information surrounding guardianship. We've listed some of the topics on guardianship that we want to address at our next speaker series. And we anticipate that will take the full hour just on guardianship. So this evening, we're going to focus the content on public benefits, and both guardianship and public benefits. Those topics came from our transition conference. And when we surveyed everyone asking what would people like more information about, these were the top two areas. So tonight, again, we'll focus more on the public benefits. And then at our next speaker series, we will solely make that topic for guardianship. So we'd like to start off this evening introducing you to Sandy Whitecamp. She is our benefits specialist counselor here at BCI, and she's going to go over Medicaid and Social Security, amongst other topics.
Yep. Am I ready?
You're right.
Okay. Welcome. Some of you have already met with me, and for those of you who have not, hopefully you'll get some information here today to kind of start thinking about this process. And I wanted to start with Medicaid and why it's important. Our next speaker is Judy Nager, and she's going to talk about the Developmental Disabilities Resource Board. But those services are they are funded through Medicaid dollars. So without Medicaid, having active case management is not something that the DDRB can offer. So that's kind of a very critical benefit. I always tell the families that I work with that Medicaid has two sides. It has the social support side as well as the healthcare side. So a lot of people understand they have one or the other, but they don't oftentimes think of it offering both. So it offers healthcare as well as that social support side. So Medicaid can be an extremely necessary and helpful benefit, even if your son or daughter does not need that healthcare benefit at this time. And Judy, I think, will talk a little bit more about case management and the DDRB and some of those services a little bit later tonight. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Social Security and supplemental security. So typically your 17, 18, 19-year-old individual doesn't have very much of a work history, and they're going to be applying for supplemental security, SSI. And SSI is funded through state general revenue dollars. Even though an individual has to be determined eligible by Social Security, it is funded through state revenue. So sometimes people get a little confused about, oh, I paid into my Social Security. Individuals in SSI have not really paid into the system. They don't have enough work history to do that. And I always like to really kind of talk a little bit about that educational IEPs, individual education plans, are very different than what Social Security looks at. Social Security is looking at work and how those limitations are going to impact someone's work. So if your son or daughter had an IEP, they addressed difficulties with reading or writing or completing assignments, any of those things. What Social Security is really looking at is how those deficits are going to translate into a work setting. So when you're filling out Social Security applications and you're trying to determine, well, is my son or daughter going to get SSI? Oh, I've heard they need a lawyer. The very first thing, everybody gets turned down. I think that that's a little bit of a misnomer. A lot of individuals that I work with who are in the developmental disabilities community don't typically get turned down. They sometimes do, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Again, this is just a very short, brief kind of overview, but I do kind of help individuals kind of delve a lot deeper into that application process and what Social Security is really looking for. So when a person has SSI and they go to work, people earn work credits. So it doesn't matter if you work at Wendy's, if you work as an organizational employee at BCI, if you're working in the family business, as long as you are paying Social Security taxes, you're getting work credits. And when you are very young, under the age of 22, you only need 6 work credits in order to be eligible to move to Social Security disability. So a lot of individuals will get Social Security at age 18. They'll have a little part-time job, maybe even working as little as $500 or $600 a month. And after about a year and a half, they're going to have enough credits to move to disability. So typically people do not stay on SSI for a very long time if they are working. And Katie asked me to talk about one last piece, and that some people call it SSA, but it's actually an adult disabled child or a disabled adult child. I always get the letters confused. When an individual has been determined eligible for SSI before the age of 22 and their parent either retires, becomes disabled, or deceased, that individual is eligible for 50% of that parent's Social Security based on the parent's work record. So a lot of individuals, they may start out on SSI, they may work their way up to SSDI if they're working, and then maybe when their parent gets ready to retire, they might be eligible for that benefit. And there's a lot of ins and outs and rules about those benefits, how those are impacted by work. Medicaid has different rules about those benefits as well. And again, those are really kind of digging into the weeds, as I call it, that I'm not really going to talk about here tonight. But just kind of wanted to touch base a little bit. If you want more information about SSI and that application process, or possibly you're a parent who might be looking at retiring in a year or two, or maybe you've already retired, want some more information about Medicaid, you can make that appointment with me. That is a direct link to my calendar. I did want to state, especially about the Medicaid piece, because DDRB requires active Medicaid to have case management. They will, Tiffany Kopp, KOPP, will help people apply for Medicaid so that they can get that eligibility to get that DDRB services going. And she will meet with individuals and go line by line on filling out that Medicaid application. So if you have questions about Medicaid, you probably need to go to Tiffany Kopp. If you have questions about Social Security, or once you've got that Medicaid, how working is going to be impacted, then you would kind of come to me to ask those questions. So I'm going to turn it back to Katie. She wanted short and sweet, so I think I got that, maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Sandy.
all right.
And yeah, we joke the acronym soup, but it is pretty complicated, especially if it's not normal in your world to navigate into and through SSI, SSDI, SSA. So please, if you would like more specific information, Sandy is a resource to you. As Sandy mentioned, next up, we would like to introduce Judy Nager. Judy is the case manager mentor for the DDRB. Judy, since you're participating virtually, can we hear you?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. If you could advance to the next slide, Katie, that would be helpful. In order to just kick it off here, I'd like to tell you about the DDRB for those of you who may not be familiar. The DDRB is a Senate Bill 40 board, and quite simply put, several years ago, the taxpayers of St. Charles County decided to self-assess a tax to go into a fund for people with developmental disabilities to fund direct services. And so at this point, there are dozens of agencies that receive funding through the Developmental Disabilities Resource Board, BCI being one of them. And back in 2006, DDRB began their case management program in an effort to lower the caseloads of the case managers with the Department of Mental Health. Next slide, please. Okay. For those of you who do not have case management at this point in time, it really is the link to the resources that you're going to need for your son or daughter when they're finished with schooling. The minimum age for the state case management is 18 because that's when most individuals can become eligible for Medicaid. A few years back, the Developmental Disabilities Resource Board decided that although most 16 and 17-year-olds are not eligible for Medicaid, they would provide case management services to individuals regardless of their Medicaid status in order to help folks through that transition process of making decisions about what's going to happen after school ends and what path the person's going to take and how will that be how will that play out, how will it be paid for. So in St. Charles County, the residents do have that second option for case management through the DDRB. We will support 16 and 17-year-olds without Medicaid with the understanding that at age 18, you apply for Medicaid. And from 18 on, you have to be eligible for Medicaid to continue with case management. Next slide, please. If you do not currently have case management services, your first point of contact is going to be the St. Louis Regional Office. They determine eligibility for case management for everyone in the region, whether your intent is to come to the DDRB eventually or have a case manager with the state of Missouri. If your son or daughter is 16 or 17 years old and they are applying for case management services for the first time, very important to say that you are applying for DDRB case management because their first question typically is, do you have active Medicaid? And if the person's under the age of 18, chances are they do not have active Medicaid. So once that initial call is made and you connect with intake and assessment, they're going to gather some information from you, and they're going to set up an appointment to do a virtual assessment to determine if your son or daughter is actually eligible for services. Next slide, please. So how they determine eligibility is whether or not a person is diagnosed with a developmental disability. And I'm certain that at some point you have all heard or learned the definition of a developmental disability. But it's a disability that would occur prior to the age of 22, and most significantly causes a substantial functional limitation in 2 or more of the following areas: self-care, understanding and use of language, learning, mobility, self-direction, or capacity for independent living. Unfortunately, mental illness is not considered a developmental disability under this definition. Next slide, please. So here we get to the Medicaid piece, and individuals should apply for Medicaid when they turn 18. And the reason being that the person who is 18 years old is applying based on their own financial resources. Younger kids are judged based on the entire household income, which includes mom and dad's income, and for the most part, that makes them ineligible because they have too many resources if they're including the entire household income. Next slide, please. So the application process for Medicaid, the application forms, the instructions, all of this can be done online. And that is the direct address. It's Department of Social Services. You can also go in person to the Medicaid office in St. Charles, which is on Harry Truman Boulevard. It's a state office building that also houses vocational rehabilitation. And I want to correct what Sandy said. Tiffany Kopp, who works in our office, will assist our customers that are already receiving case management services, who are 16 and 17, to go through the application process for Medicaid when they turn 18. But she does not have the availability to be able to help everybody who could possibly need that assistance. That's something that you'll have to get assistance with through the Department of Social Services. Next slide, please. This is probably the meat of what it is you want to know. How are services funded? Once your son or daughter leaves school, where does the money come from to pay for programs and services that will meet their needs? It's funded through home and community-based waivers, and there's several of them. The reason why there's several is because they have different monetary caps to them. And so there are waivers for people who don't need a lot of services, and there are waivers for people who do need a lot of services. But the eligibility for those waivers are all the same. We are lucky in our county to be eligible for Partnership for Hope waiver funding, because a portion of that comes from the county board, from the Developmental Disabilities Resource Board. Not every county in the state has access to Partnership for Hope waiver. Next slide, please. So to qualify for a waiver, the person must have active Medicaid. That's number one. They have to have a diagnosis of a developmental disability. And that's the same definition that we saw on a previous slide. And then it results in substantial functional limitations in 3 life areas. And it's the same life areas that was listed on the previous side, but in this particular case, to get a waiver, you have to have a limitation in 3 areas. A limitation in 2 areas makes you eligible for case management services, but to be eligible for this funding, you have to have limitations in 3 areas. And they identify those through an assessment that's called the Missouri Adaptive Ability Scale, or a MAAS, M-A-A-S. And that is the assessment that's administered when you first apply for case management services. And that's the assessment that's used to determine whether or not a person is eligible for waiver funding. Next slide, please. So examples of some of the services that you can get through developmental disabilities waiver: dehabilitation, variety of different therapies, and these are generally for age 22 and up. Prior to age 22, they're covered by straight Medicaid or private insurance. So OTPT, speech, behavior therapy, independent living skills training, which would include personal assistance services, skills development, community access and networking, personal care services, self-directed services. It funds transportation. Right now, as you probably know, our transportation resources are very limited, but that's a work in progress. It funds out-of-home respite, and it funds residential services as well. Now, I know a lot of folks hope that their son or daughter is going to make a natural transition from living at home to moving into some sort of supported living arrangement or something like that. Funding for those services is very, very hard to get, and you have to be in a very critical situation to be eligible to receive funding for residential services. But that's something that your case manager can talk through with you and provide you more information as the time comes. Next slide, please. The DDRB also funds services that are available to people who have DD case management, but maybe they're not eligible for a waiver because they don't have limitations in 3 areas. They do have a transportation reimbursement program for people in competitive employment or employment and training programs or educational programs. And this is a reimbursement. It's there's a cap on it. And it's not really intended to supplant regular transportation services. It's a supplement. And so there has to be a long-term transportation solution for the person in the works. Excuse me. There are grants available for in-home respite services, which enable you to use your own provider in your own home. Individualized supported living or ISLA services, those are for people who have a lot of good independent living skills, but just need a little bit of support. You know, maybe a few hours a week to have someone come in and work with them on budgeting, getting medical appointments scheduled, grocery shopping, things like that. The DDRB does reimburse families for conference participation, and there's also adaptive equipment grants available for people who might need home modifications or, you know, single pieces of equipment that can just be purchased and used immediately. Next slide, please. So we have a great website, ddrb.org. If you are interested in learning more about the agencies that are funded by the DDRB and what types of services they provide, click on funded agencies. If you want to learn more about our case management program, click on case management. And a reminder that any questions will go in the Q&A if you have questions.
Thank you very much, Judy. I know that's a big ask to consolidate all that information in just a few minutes. So,
well, I feel like I was talking very fast, and if anybody missed anything, please ask.
no, thank you very much. Next, you'll see Doug on here. Doug is also participating virtually for us. So Doug is somebody who has, and I should say, is currently going through navigating the systems with his daughter for benefits and resources. So I'd like to introduce you to Doug Tracy.
All
Doug,
right.
can you hear you? Hi,
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Katie. Gosh, it's kind of a hard act to follow with Sandy and Judy knowing what they're talking about. And I know kind of nothing, seems like it at times. But as Katie said, I am kind of navigating through as a parent what it's like to have a daughter with a developmental disability and also some other physical disabilities as well. So Katie asked if I would just kind of speak from a parent standpoint, kind of what it's like to go through the process. My daughter Hannah is 22 years old, so she's been out of high school now for 4 years. To give you a little background on what her health situation is, she was born with a very rare genetic syndrome that we didn't even know what syndrome it was until she was nearly 10 years old. The syndrome is named oculofacial cardiodental, or OFCD syndrome. It impacts less than 1 in a million. I always told Hannah when she was growing up that she was a 1 in a million girl, and that ends up being a literal statement. Less than 1 in a million are impacted with it. She was the first one in St. Louis to ever be diagnosed. It deals with a mutation with the B-core gene that is on the X chromosome, so it only impacts females. So she is a very rare situation, to put it mildly. She's had 73 surgeries in her 22 years, 5 open hearts, and then a lot of eye surgeries. She's legally blind now. And so from the time that she got into school, we started the IEP process, started the special education process, and kind of, went through that and learned as we went. And honestly, things went pretty smooth. We were in the Fort Zumwalt School District. And as long as she was in school, it seemed like things progressed along. We had very supportive administration and teachers that were involved. And they were able to modify, for the most part, what she needed to succeed in school. As things progressed, it got a little bit more difficult when she got up into the higher grades, and especially in the high school. She had needed to have things brailled for her and so on. So, but the IEP process seemed to work really well. About her junior or senior year, we started to talk about post-school transitioning, and that's where things got a little bit more difficult. Really, the one thing that we got with graduation was some contacts for St. Charles Community College, if she wanted to go that route. So we went and met with them. And basically it was, we found out real quickly that school, post high school for any sort of disabled student gets much more complicated and challenging. With Hannah being blind, she needed to have someone that was going to be able to braille test and homework for her. And they basically told us that, well, she's going to need to find a friend that will be willing to take notes for her, and then we'll try to get it brailled. At some point, test, we might get brailled, we might not get brailled. And so it became a little bit overwhelming and tough for Hannah to think, well, how am I going to go down this route if I don't know if I'm going to have the accommodations needed to succeed. So kind of decided, okay, instead of going the community college route, we'll go the job route, and thought that would be a fairly easy process. And it turned out that it was a little more complicated than what we had thought. We worked with Rehab Services for the Blind. That's an agency that tries to help blind and visually impaired individuals obtain employment. And so kind of got that going. Started getting a resume together, started kind of doing some interviews, and about that time COVID hit, and so that kind of delayed everything for us. And then after COVID, kind of got it going again. And one of the things that we've learned is that it seems like every time you kind of start making a little bit of progress with an agency, the caseworker that you're working with will end up leaving, and you kind of have to start all over. And with my job and with everything, to me, it's about relationships, and you build those relationships with the caseworker, and they get to know you, they get to know, in this case, my daughter Hannah, and it really kind of starts working. And about the time you start making some progress, there's a change. So that's been one of the challenges in kind of working through that that process. So after COVID, caseworker left, and at that point in time, everything kind of went silent with RSB when we were working with them. It was almost a year before we heard from them again. In the meantime, I was invited by a BCI board member to go to a Cup of Joy breakfast for BCI to kind of see the facility in Lincoln County. And while I was there, kind of talked to a few people there and met Katie. And Katie started asking me questions. Have you talked to such and such agency? And I said, no. Have you talked to this agency? I said, no. Have you talked to this one? I said, no. So really was just a huge informational gathering time for me, just to kind of know, where do you start the process? And so first thing Katie did was, as Judy just mentioned, was give me the number for the St. Louis regional office. And so I was able to call them and kind of get that thing started. They then got us in touch with DMH and did an intake assessment. We went through that, and then at that point got into to St. Charles and kind of started talking to them. The process just kind of, it does take some patience. I've learned going through it. I'm kind of one of those, I want to know, give me the 5 steps that I need to do, and this will, and I'll do those 5 steps. And I've learned that that's not really such a thing when you're trying to get your child transition from school into either the workforce or with college. So it's basically just, kind of find that next step. So what the caseworker at DMH was able to do through the Division of Developmental Disabilities was help us get enrolled in SSI and Medicaid. So we did get that taken care of, as Judy just mentioned in her presentation. That's a step that has to be done. I'd never seen those applications before, so it was a process of going through those, but we did get that taken care of. I think as far as some of the triumphs is what I've learned is that everyone that we've worked with has been absolutely in it for the right reason and just super people. They really do want to help and try to help you through the transition. I think the biggest challenge is just kind of, where do you begin the process? That's why I'm so grateful to Katie on getting me started on that, because you just don't know. It's kind of like, we didn't really get a handoff from high school that says, okay, here is the next steps that you need to take. Here's phone numbers that you need to call. Here's options that you have. We just really didn't get that information. That was probably the biggest challenge on getting all that going. Judy mentioned transportation issues. That is a huge barrier, especially with Hannah being blind. It's a little, we're rooting for those self-driven cars to get a little more up to speed, but transportation is big. That's kind of going to be a hurdle that once we do find employment for her, is then we'll have to figure out how we're going to get her from point A to point B, but we'll deal with that when we have to. One thing that I've learned is it seems like there's a little bit of communication issue between agencies. It seems like, there's some redundancy, that you end up kind of having to give the same information to one agency that you just gave the last one. There's not a lot of overlap between, okay, yes, we got Hannah's file, so we're good to go. So it's just kind of something to prepare for when you start going down that road of getting the transition process taken care of. One thing that I've learned through the process is that we're very fortunate to live in an area where we are. I grew up in a very small town in Illinois, and I can't imagine trying to go through this process without there being agencies and assistance. I know they're out there in places, but it's just harder, I think, to do that. So we're very fortunate to have the agencies that we have available. The biggest thing is just to find a person that can help you get going. I'm really, really bad at asking people for help. I just keep thinking that I can just do it on my own and I'll get through this. And one thing that I've learned through the process is you've got to ask people for help. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't understand this. There's somebody out there that does, and just find that network that can help you get through that and can help you navigate the process. It will take some patience, and there's never really, in talking to other parents now, as I've kind of gone through this process, there's never really a point where it's going to be over. There's always going to be some adjustments and some things that need to be done or tweaked or sent in again or so forth. But it is there. And at the end of the day, it's really about what's going to be the best for our kids. Some of them face so many challenges that the way that I look at it is sometimes this can be frustrating at times. It can take a lot of time to get through. But compared to some of the challenges and things that they face on a daily basis, it's something that we can do. So I just encourage everybody to just reach out to get help and realize there are resources there and people that are going to help through the transition as your child goes from high school into the work or a college environment.
Doug, thank you so very much. And I appreciate how nice you were in phrasing. I know there's been a lot of frustrations along the way, so you explained that eloquently, the little hiccups that have happened along the way. So thank you very much for sharing. We can open it up for Q&A. Any questions that we can answer for you? That question could be geared toward Doug or Judy or Sandy. Again, I think there's a hand raise, but if you can send any questions through the Q&A. If not, I know I came up with a couple while people were talking. Do you have? Okay. So I know we've talked about, and Doug, you talked about this, but the length of time when someone fills out that initial paperwork for Medicaid to the time where they actually get case management. I don't know if Judy or Doug, either one of you guys want to tackle that one. Oh, hold on, Judy, I think you're muted.
Yes, I was. Sorry. I think it's different for every person because it depends on who gets your file to review at Medicaid, and if they need additional information or if they have enough information when the application is initially filed. It's different for every single person. It definitely does not happen overnight.
Yeah, I think our process was around 4 to 5 months from the time we started the application process. And it was kind of interesting. We never got notified one way or the other on if she had been accepted to Medicaid. And so I had to get back with the caseworker and ask about, kind of where that was. And I said, is it normal to be waiting, 3 months, 4 months for an answer? And she said, no. And some way, somehow, she had been accepted to Medicaid before I even filled out the application. And I asked the caseworker, how does that happen? And she said, we don't ask those types of questions. so it's just, it's one of those, it's like I think I'm too logical on some things that, I kind of want it to flow. And the thing that I've learned is sometimes it's not going to flow as easily. And Judy, you're exactly right. It seems it depends on who gets the file. And kind of who runs with the ball, and you just learn that, okay, there's another step that we've got accomplished, and so we can check that one off and then go to the next one, and the next one may be quick or it may be long, but you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and eventually you're going to get where you want to be.
Yeah. I want to add something there. So if someone has SSI in Missouri, they're automatically going to be eligible for Medicaid. They still have to apply, but they're going to be automatically eligible. So like if you do the SSI application first, you don't have to, you can do them simultaneously or apply for Medicaid first. It's a preference. But if your son or daughter already has SSI, it does go a lot quicker because the state doesn't have to determine if they're disabled because the federal government has already determined that. So typically when you already have SSI, it does go a little bit quicker as far as getting approved for Medicaid. Now, getting approved for the case management, that should technically be a quicker process because you've already got the Medicaid.
Dee said we've got
Yeah.
Question?
So Teresa would like to know, she says, so those who live outside of St. Charles County are eligible for DDRB services? And then if yes, our child needs to be on Medicaid and SSI. She says she's confused. So Judy, can you clear up that DDRB service area question?
Certainly. Because DDRB as an organization is a St. Charles County tax entity, we can only support people who live in St. Charles County. But there are similar case management providers in every county, not every county, but all of the counties surrounding us. There are similar case management providers where you would have a choice between having a case manager from the Department of Mental Health or having a case manager from a Senate Bill 40 board like the DDRB.
And regardless of the service area, is the rule always they need to be on Medicaid and SSI?
Not SSI, but to
Just
have Medicaid.
Medicaid.
Just
Yes.
Medicaid?
Yeah.
And I can't speak to what allowances other county boards have for supporting people under the age of 18 who don't have Medicaid. But I will say, St. Charles County in general is a fairly affluent county. So there are not a lot of children who qualify for Medicaid as, a financial need. But if you get into St. Louis County, there's a lot more people who may qualify under the age of 18 for Medicaid, and they can get case management services. So it really kind of depends on the family's resources. But for the most part, at the age of 18, a person can apply on their own for Medicaid coverage, and only their resources are considered. So they may or may not have SSI benefits, which is not a lot, not enough to preclude eligibility for Medicaid based on financial resources if they had some financial benefits coming in.
Okay. And then the next question is from John. He wanted to know, what age do you start the application for Medicaid for someone approaching the age of 18?
The month that they turn 18.
So you can't pre-file that application?
No, they won't accept it.
Nope.
Okay, a lot of age questions. Can we start the application process before she turns 18? She'll be 18 in June. So for Jess and Brian, they would start that application the month she turns 18, which would be
Right.
next June.
Right. And SSI is the same way. They cannot apply until they are actually 18.
Okay. And JD would like to know about when is the guardianship speaker series. We will announce that as soon as we set a date and secure a speaker. So I would suggest that you just watch our social media, our Facebook or our LinkedIn. But also we will most likely email everyone who attended the Transition Planning Conference again, and probably loop in any new participants that we had tonight, and we'll get that date out to everyone. And I think that's it for the Q&A.
All right.
JD had a second question. Yeah, so the second question from JD, what should be done before the child turns 18, and what has to happen once they turn 18? And I'm assuming this is from the case management.
Well, since case management is available to people that are 16 and 17, I would very strongly encourage folks to go ahead and apply if they live in St. Charles County to get a DDRB case manager, because that case manager will be able to sit in on those IEP meetings where transition is being discussed, where post-secondary services are being discussed, and actually be able to provide guidance and maybe take on some of the initial responsibilities of preparing. For example, if somebody was, the plan for them was to go to a dehabilitation program, maybe they are not ready for employment at this point, but they need a program to go to during the day where they can learn skills to become more independent. A lot of those programs have waiting lists, and the sooner we can get folks on those waiting lists, the more likely it is that they won't have to wait a long time when school's over to be able to get the support that they need in those programs. That's just an example. So if someone is 16 and you're talking about transition in IEP meetings, it would be great to have a case manager there, and that person will see you through that process.
And for anybody who is in St. Louis County, that would be contacting the Productive Living Board. And then for Lincoln.
Actually, not the Productive Living Board. No, it's the Center for Human Resources.
Oh, that's right.
Where Robin went, yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Center for Human Resources for St. Louis County, and then
Lincoln County is Community Opportunities. But I don't know if they take 16 and 17-year-olds. I know DDRB does, but I don't know what the minimum age is for those other case management providers.
Okay, we have another question from Michelle. She said, our son is currently 10 and was just recently approved for the Sarah Lopez waiver. Does all of this mean when he turns 18 that we'll need to reapply for Medicaid?
Yes, but the process is simplified in that he is eligible for children's Medicaid now, and it doesn't automatically convert to adult Medicaid. You still have to go through an application process, but there's not all of the qualification issues.
Great. And so Teresa said, so Medicaid is basically the ticket to most everything. Is that?
Yes.
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 Okay.
And Judy, will you help me understand what would be, if anything, a reason that somebody would not qualify for Medicaid at the age of 18?
Well, they still have to be, they have to provide medical evidence that they have a disability that is permanently and totally disabling.
Another thing might be resources.
Yeah, true.
Right.
If someone has a trust fund or an inheritance of some sort, or money in the bank with their name on it could prohibit them from being eligible.
Right.
Oh, and just a last comment from JD said, I don't live in St. Charles County and we don't have an active case with the St. Louis regional office. And she said, sadly, my last IEP is tomorrow. What ray of hope can we offer, JD?
Well, what county, can you ask what county they live in?
JD, can you add that into the Q&A?
I'd refer to Doug's comment on don't lose hope.
Yeah, right. It's a good one.
I mean, and the thing is it's not
St. Louis County.
It's not absolute. I mean, ideally, you're going to have all these in place when your child has that last IEP. But if you don't have it in place, it's never too late. I see lots of families who don't decide to apply for Medicaid or Social Security until their family member is 21, 22. They tried doing various things and those things didn't work or whatever. And then they decide to go the route of public benefits. It's never too late. So if, even though your meeting is tomorrow, even if you don't have things in place, just know that now you have a little bit more information and you could bring that to the meeting and see if, you can get additional resources of where to go, knowing what you know now.
Sandy, we were in that exact position. I mean, we didn't have a caseworker at the last IEP. I had no idea until probably 6 months ago that Hannah needed Medicaid. I thought, well, she's on my insurance. We don't need Medicaid. We don't need it. So I had no idea until 6 months ago. So Hannah was 22 before I even applied to Medicaid. So perfect world. I love Judy's idea of you'd have that caseworker there at the IEP and could just kind of, it would be more seamless, I think. But as Sandy just said, it's not like you can't do anything else after that, because we were in the exact same situation that Sandy just described, but we had none of this outlined at the time. We didn't have a caseworker. We had nothing at the Medicaid. It was down the road. So it's not as if you don't have all that in place at the last IEP that you can't do it later.
Right.
All right, Doug, thank you so much for joining us from out of state. Judy, thank you very much with all the information, and thank you, Sandy, too. As Dee mentioned, we will share when the next speaker series date will be. I anticipate end of January, beginning February. That'll be solely on the guardianship topic. So again, thank you guys for presenting, and thank you everybody for attending tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.